What's up, guys? I'm Doc B with Doc B Design, and you are, well, whoever you are. But regardless, we are here for our very first Art 101 video where we are going to be covering watercolor basics. Now, we're not going to get too in-depth on anything specific today, but we are going to go over a few of the basics. Number 1, brushes. Number 2, paper. And number 3, paint, which I'm actually going to hold on to. Now, the first thing we're going to cover is these guys, brushes. You might ask why, but this one's pretty easy. If you ever go into an art store or a craft store by yourself for the first time, you're probably going to be completely overwhelmed with the variety of brushes that are available to you. Now, there's two main differences between brushes here. One set of brushes is going to be synthetic, while the other are sable. Fake hair versus real hair. Really the only thing that you need to know. Now, the fake hair brush is obviously going to be a lot cheaper, while your real hair brushes are going to be more expensive. When you're just starting off with watercolors, I honestly wouldn't even consider looking at sable brushes. They are really nice, it is very different painting with them, but there's no need to spend that money until you know you like painting with watercolors. As far as your beginner set goes with actually picking out brushes, most stores and shops will actually have sets put together with a variety of different brushes in them. I recommend trying one of those out or just assembling your own set, picking individual brushes you think you might like out of the racks. It's really all a preference though. There's no right or wrong. All the different brushes will make all sorts of different paint strokes for you. So it's really a matter of trying them out for yourself to see what you like. Second, we're going to cover paper. Now, all watercolor paper is pretty much the same, but I'm going to explain to you the few different ways that you can purchase it. Number 1 is individual sheets. Something that looks a little like this. One piece of paper, you buy it, you paint on it, done. Piece of cake, right? You can also buy that same paper rolled up in a giant roll, so you can make your own sheets. Your third option is a pad, something that looks a little bit like this. The same paper, just a lot of it in a book. Your fourth option is a watercolor tablet, something that looks a little bit like this guy. Now, the difference with this is that all of the pages are actually glued down on the side so they won't bubble and warp as you're painting on the surface. Really helpful if you don't want to tape down your paintings to avoid that bubbling each time you go to paint with watercolors. Now, there are a few different types of watercolor paper. I know I said it's basically all the same, and it is, but I will explain to you guys the differences. Number 1 is hot press versus cold press. If you want to paint on a smooth surface, hot press is for you. If you want the textured, thick watercolor paper that most people think about, with that grain and depth and the ridge right on the paper, you're going to be looking at cold press. The only difference between this paper is how it's made. It's not really going to affect your painting too much. Again, this is a preference thing here. The other way that watercolor paper varies is with its weight. Now, the weight with watercolor paper is expressed in poundage, or lbs. So, 40 pound, 50 pound, 90 pound watercolor paper is all going to be pretty thin and flimsy. It's going to wave back and forth. Something that's around 300 pound paper, 600 pound paper, or 800 pound paper is going to feel more like a board, and it's not going to bend at all, no matter how much water you add to it. When we talk about watercolor painting, of course, we have to talk about the paint itself. The paint comes in two major forms. Number 1 being a tube like this. This little guy is jam-packed full of paint, just like an acrylic tube, an oil tube, or a tube of toothpaste. The other way you can buy it is in a pan, which looks a little something like this. This right here is a half pan of watercolor, super tiny, but it's the same paint from here squeezed out into this little guy. You might not be familiar with this shape, but something like this probably looks familiar. Almost everyone has painted with one of these at some point in time. If you have yourself a bunch of these watercolor tubes and you want to figure out how to make something that looks like this, we'll have a video for you later on how to set up a watercolor palette. But for now, we'll just go over the basics of this versus this. Now, it's all the same paint, but what you're paying for with watercolor paint is pigment. The more pigment that's in a tube or in one of these pans, the more expensive it is. There's all sorts of brands of paint out there that all use different mixing mediums, techniques, and amounts of pigment in their paint. Again, I would suggest starting off with a starter kit of tubes like this, putting them in a palette and trying them out. But if the paint that you got doesn't seem to be agreeing with you, don't worry. It might just be time to try some artist grade paint. If you're not sure what grade of paint you're using or what grade of paint you should look into using for the first time, I'll run over those for you right now. To start off, we have student or craft grade paint. That's your cheapest paint with low pigment. Next, we have artist grade paint, a little bit more expensive with more pigment. And then at the top, we have professional grade paint, max pigment, and max price. That's the difference between a tube like this costing $3 or $4, $15 or $20, all the way up to $60 or $80 on the professional grade side. Now, you have a very, very basic understanding of what it takes to paint with watercolors. You need your brushes, you need your paper, you need your paint, and then of course a little bit of water to add to that paint as well for when you're painting. Now, again, if you're looking for something a little bit more in depth, you'll probably be looking out for our next set of videos that'll be dropping later this year. But this is all for our first Art 101 video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them under the video, reach out to me on social media, and we will try to get them answered in our next video.